Today on CityCast Nashville, Tennessee currently ranks third among states with the highest number of book bans. And the debate over what kids can read is reshaping classrooms, libraries, and even local politics. Joining us is Christina Soontornbot, award-winning author, STEM educator, and coordinator of the Tennessee chapter of Authors Against Book Bans, to break down what's happening, why it's happening, and what Nashvillians can do about it. It's Tuesday, February 10th. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Christina, why does Tennessee have so many more book bans than other states?
Yeah, right. We are on the podium. We're number 3. Wow. We don't want to be on this podium.
No,
we want to be off of it. Well, so one thing to know is that book bans are not new. From the moment that books began being printed, there were people who wanted to take them out of readers' hands. But what is new is the way today's bans are being coordinated and just the sheer volume. So just to go back a little bit, it was right around the start of the COVID pandemic when we started to see a huge spike in book banning. And most of that was driven by outside pressure groups. Your listeners will probably be familiar with Moms for Liberty, groups like that, and then the administrators and the board members that they were influencing. So a typical tactic for those groups is to post lists of hundreds of books that they think should get banned for one reason or other. And often a majority of those books are about LGBTQ plus characters or people of color. We see a lot of Black history books that they want to get banned. And then they'll encourage folks to take that list to their school boards and get the books banned whole hog. So last year, the American Library Association reported that 72% of book bans were driven by groups like this. And then more recently, what we're seeing happen, especially here in Tennessee, is that book banning is now also being driven by legislation and statewide policies. And this has led to hundreds of books being pulled out of public schools. And now we're seeing that it's bleeding into our public libraries. And really the piece of legislation that I think your listeners need to know about is the Age Appropriate Materials Act.
Okay, for folks who are not familiar, what does that bill do?
It was originally passed in 2022, and then it was amended in 2024. And it's the amendment that's really causing so many problems. You know, I think whoever named the act did a really good job of marketing.
Right.
Because when you hear, books in a library should be appropriate for the age and maturity of the child who checks it out, I think everyone agrees with that. But the details of the legislation go much further. So what the law actually says is that schools, so applies to public schools, cannot have any materials that in whole or in part contain nudity, sexual excitement, sexual conduct, or excess violence. And the materials have to be appropriate for students in any of the grades kindergarten through 12. So right away, you can see there that the language is vague, right?
Very gray.
Like what classifies as sexual excitement to me might not be the same as you, right? So like, does a book about a first kiss count as sexual excitement? And how about excess violence? Does the Iliad or the Odyssey or Romeo and Juliet have excess violence? Another thing to note is that the law specifies, it says in whole or in part. So if you have a book and the whole book is about art history, but it has one photo of a nude Greek statue, then that could get it removed from a library. And actually, that's exactly what we've seen happen. And the law also says that the books have to be for the maturity level of kinder through 12. So the result is you have books being taken out of a high school because they don't meet the age appropriateness for elementary school, which is just so maddening, right?
So it's just a blanketed law.
Yes. I think even the legislators who wrote it had no idea what the consequences would be, that it would be so broad. So the law was written for public schools, but then in October, the Tennessee Secretary of State, Trey Hargett, sent a letter out to all the public libraries, instructing them to review their collections according to state age appropriateness law, even though that law only applies to schools. And he also said in his letter that the books must comply with President Trump's executive order on gender ideology. Even though an executive order applies to federal agencies, it doesn't apply to state entities like a public library. So our public libraries are getting a lot of conflicting information. They're being told a lot of vague things. And beyond that, they're not being given much guidance.
How is this law already impacting our neighbors in Rutherford County? Folks, that's the county that borders Davidson to the southeast, and it contains Smyrna and Murfreesboro. A lot of people live down there, and they commute back and forth to Nashville for work. So tell us about the library board meeting they had on February 2nd.
I'll just back up a little bit to the previous board meeting in December, and I was there. And at that meeting, the director of libraries, the board oversees her. She requested whistleblower protections from the board because she wanted to report on the misconduct by the board's chair. His name is Cody York. And so she went on to say that Mr. York had pressured her on multiple occasions to remove books that he did not agree with from the shelves. So this is going outside of library policy, right? Like there's a whole procedure for removing books, but he just was going to give her a list and she should take them off the shelf. And that he had even checked out books using his own library card and hid them in his office for so long that they had been marked lost in the system.
I hope he's paying his fines.
Yeah, yeah, right. But really, the worst part was that she said that he had asked her to produce a list of patrons who had checked out a certain Judy Blume book, including their private information, their names, their addresses, the number of children and adults in the household, and she had refused to give that to him. So I was at this library board meeting, and when she said that he had requested that, there was an audible gasp in the room because it's such a huge ethical violation, an enormous breach of trust by someone who's supposed to be a public servant. There have been loud calls in his community for his resignation, but as far as I know, there has not been an investigation into Mr. York's conduct, but really there should be.
Okay, well, so then how has this unfolded?
I also attended this most recent meeting. It was a huge turnout. We had over 150 people there, and many came because they had heard about what happened in the previous meeting, and many were there hoping to call for some consequences for the board, for Board Chair York. That did not happen. So what was addressed in the meeting is that Trey Hargett, our Secretary of State, had sent libraries this letter asking them to review their collections. So Rutherford County did review its collection. The libraries shut down for weeks because they had to review, I believe it was over 60,000 books. It was so much work that the librarians decided they had to close because they had to focus on this. And so they did. They reviewed them all. They came to the board with their recommendations, and the recommendation was to not remove any books. They did recommend that some books be changed from the children's section to the teen section, or from the teen section to the adult section, but no books need to get banned. There were some people on the board who didn't agree with this, and so their vote was to, for now, not to remove books, but that the board members can make their own lists and they're going to come and review it next month. So basically, they had their librarians conduct this massive review, and now they're leaving the door open for them to ban books anyway. So it just made me think when I heard that, I was like, why do you even have librarians? This is why you hire them. They are fully trained to do this work. The board members are not trained to do this work, and they should not be imposing their own personal agendas on the collections in the library. So I think we have to wait for the next meeting to see what's going to happen. So the story is not over there.
I believe I saw a photo of a board member from this recent meeting holding a picture of Adam and Eve was naked. And that book, whatever picture that was in, had been removed from the shelf, but then the board member said that this book should not be removed?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Please tell us about that. That's that's what makes me a little crazy.
Yes. So again, this all goes back to the vagueness of the language in the Age-Appropriate Materials Act, which prohibits nudity, which, just a reminder, it doesn't apply to public libraries. It applies to public schools. And so the board member, who is one of the pro-book banning board members, said, you can't move that one. But another book that she did want moved out of the children's section, it's called the Everybody book. And it's a book about how to talk about your body using medical and scientific language. And she objected to that. Sometimes you have to laugh because otherwise you're going to cry or tear your hair out.
So I know this book, Forever, by Judy Blume. Why is it under attack?
It was published in 1975, so it's been around for 50 years, and it's been banned before. It's a book about a young girl who has her first relationship, her first boyfriend, and they're in a sexual relationship. They have a healthy sexual relationship. It's a teenage book. It's always filed in the teen section. It is a book that it speaks to teens in their own language. It doesn't talk down to them. It's very strange that it was like the one book that was singled out. Judy Blume. I've read so many Judy Blume books.
Haven't we all?
I grew up on Judy Blume.
Right, same. At these board meetings, I believe there's public comment, and there were people who were pro-book banning. What are you hearing from these people?
Well, actually, the public comments, there really was only one person
really
who came. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. Most of the public comments was about, board, please behave ethically. Please don't waste our taxpayer resources and our time. Don't ban books. There was a very eloquent speech made by a young man who said, I'm a white, straight male, but I am here to stand up for books about everyone because everyone deserves to be represented in the library. I really kind of teared up to hear that because that's what a library is. The library is for everyone. The gentleman who stood up to be pro-book banning, he was talking about his personal religious beliefs. I respect anyone's religious beliefs. I think everyone in the room did as well. But I think the important thing is that those cannot be imposed on the general public. When you start to restrict what everyone else has access to because of that, that's when we really start to lose the foundations of our democracy. We don't want to go down that road. It always makes me think about in the Cultural Revolution during Mao's reign in China. It was so violent. It was so oppressive. And if you had a Bible in your house, you were on his list. You would get taken out of your home and get sent to prison for that. I just think we have to protect our freedoms to read, to think freely, access ideas. That is so foundational to who we are as Americans.
Before the Age Appropriateness Act, it was up to the parent, right?
Yes, parents have always had the ability to dictate what their own children read. Every school has a policy for parents to talk to their librarians and to, say, I don't want my child to participate in this lesson or to read this book for this or that reason. That has been in place for a very long time. And, I want parents to know that librarians want the parents at their schools to be involved in their child's reading. Every librarian I know wants to have good relationships with their parents. They work with parents to make sure their individual kids' needs are being met. So if there are topics that you don't want your child to be exposed to, you want to talk to them about that on their own, you have every right to do that. You always have. But what we don't want to get into, again, is one parent or a small group of parents dictating what every child has access to. That's when it starts to trample on the rights of the other parents, right? Like if I say, I don't want my kid reading this book, therefore your kid can't have it, then that violates your rights as a parent.
So we've been really focused on Rutherford County, but here in Davidson County, we do have our own independent library system. What are you hearing about book banning efforts here in Nashville?
One big takeaway for me after seeing what's happened in Rutherford County is that it makes such a huge difference who is on your board. We really rely on these people to be good stewards of the public trust, to act ethically, and not to have a personal agenda. So with legislation like the Age Appropriate Materials Act and the Secretary of State threatening library funding, if you have a board that isn't willing to take a stand for readers, or even if you have a board that's inexperienced or confused, and I think a lot of this is intentionally confusing, then you're likely going to see a censorship and a loss of rights. But there are other counties, including rural counties outside of Nashville, where their library boards haven't removed a single book because they trust their librarians to do the jobs they're trained to do. So I would say in Nashville, I have not heard about censorship in Nashville, but when it comes to school libraries, all Tennessee public schools are required to comply with the age appropriate materials law. So if your kids go to public school in Nashville, then your teachers and your librarians are undoubtedly struggling under this. They're worried about doing the wrong thing. They don't want to get in trouble if they don't restrict enough, but they don't want to over restrict. And all of this harms our kids because when our educators are stressed, when they're not feeling valued or trusted, all of this takes a toll on them, and it makes it hard for them to do their jobs. These are our best champions to get kids reading, to get them to fall in love with books, and we want them to be able to focus on that 100%. So if I had advice for folks in Nashville, I would say, don't take anything for granted. I would get to know your library board members, your school board members. What are their views on book banning? If they're against banning books, then let them know you appreciate that. Let them know what your views are. So they need to hear from us even when they're doing a good job. And they need to know where the community stands before a crisis arises.
Christina, as the coordinator of the Tennessee chapter of Authors Against Book Bans, what kind of work is your organization doing on the ground?
Yeah, so Authors Against Book Bans is national, and we have chapters all over the country, and we are authors of books for all ages we take a stand against book banning. We speak up for our colleagues whose books have been banned, and we speak up for librarians because we view them as our colleagues also. They're our partners in reading. And so we have various campaigns going. We were part of a joint letter calling out the Secretary of State's actions in sending his letter out to public libraries. We decried that along with some other organizations, and we're just trying to get the word out about what's happening.
Well, I want to get a bigger picture of this because obviously, we're talking about public schools, public libraries. Is there a chance that these book bans could even extend to bookstores here in Tennessee?
That would be absolutely wild. I mean, I moved to Tennessee from Texas, and we had some legislation that was impacting bookstores because bookstores will provide books for public schools, like for their book fairs, or if an author goes in to visit. So when I go in to visit a school and I talk to kids about reading and writing and try to get them really excited, it will be a local bookstore that provides my books for kids to purchase. So in Texas, there were laws that were really restrictive on the bookstore saying, you have to label every single book if there's any kind of sexual content in it. And it was just so overwhelming for this little tiny independent bookstore to try to do that. So there was a huge lawsuit, and the bookstores did win. I am hopeful that that does not impact our wonderful and incredible Tennessee independent bookstores. So I have not heard that yet.
Okay. To close this out, I just got to ask your opinion about something. Obviously, like you said, this is not the first time books have been banned. It's not even the first time Judy Blume has been banned. But why does this keep happening? And why is knowledge so weaponized?
That is a wonderful question, and I think about this too, because I'm always like, why books? Why, if you say you really want to protect children, because this is always the reason given is we want to protect the children, There's so much that's harmful out there that I think we can all get behind about social media, the internet. That's really what my biggest worries are in protecting children. And so I'm like, why are all of these attacks happening against books? And I think it's because a book is like no other piece of media in developing empathy and compassion. It has this really unique power to connect you to someone who's not like you. So if you have a group of people who are trying to, if you have someone who wants to make you afraid of someone, like, for instance, a transgender person, or they want to make you feel like they don't want you to learn history, because if you learn your history, then you start enacting on your present, right? Then I think that books are the thing to target, because that's it. Once you read about someone and you empathize with them and you connect with them, it's really hard to be afraid of that person. It's really hard to villainize that person. That's kind of what I keep in the back of my head. And that's why it's so important. These books are so important. They are connecting us to each other as human beings, and we can't let go of that.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Can you actually shout out, if somebody maybe is an author who's listening, how can they connect with you and your organization?
Oh, I hope if you're an author, I hope that you join Authors Against Book Bans. So you can go to our website and there's a join form, and then you'll get connected with me.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Marie.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our CityCast Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Toodles!